I'm not going to, I can't sit on this because my skirt is too short as it is. Come forward. Look, you're not going to hurt anybody. There we go. So first of all, my name's Caroline Norbury. Lovely, Georgie, thank you very much. But the other thing I have to just apologise for is that during my address this morning, I said that we invested £30 million. Last year we didn't. We invested 3. So very sorry, everybody. I would have liked to have invested 30 million. We can.
Would you like to come and be chair of the audit committee at ITV?
Well, actually, I chair the Access to Finance group for the Creative Industries Council. And so basically, I think if you claim, you know what they say, fake it until you make it. Can you please make sure that anybody that you speak to who was here, that you take it upon yourself to rectify my mistake, please, because I am probably in a lot of shit. So Baz, you can sit. We can try.
Don't dare sit in your presence.
No, don't be sitting.
You might charge me 27 million, which is the missing margin.
No, I tell you what.
Of the oh, never mind. Okay. I won't refer to it again. Okay. You know, the 27 million that you added to the money you spend every year.
I think we're going to have a halfway house and perch, and we're not going to draw attention to the fact that you're wearing a scarf with cannabis leaves on it either.
It's actually a tie, but it has got cannabis leaves on it.
Sorry, tie.
Yeah.
Oh, geez, I've only had half a glass.
No, you didn't mention it. Good, thank you.
Right, good. Okay, so the point of this little session is an conversation, all very informal. But the reason I wanted us to do it is because, first of all, Sir Baz, we all have an awful lot to learn from you. And I thought that the reason we invited you was because you epitomise many of the businesses that we work with, in that you built your business up from the ground, and many of our businesses are doing that, but they haven't quite achieved to where you got to, which was to sell it on. And then to go on and do lots of exciting things. But also importantly, you've also had a peek under the covers of the government world. So
it's not a very nice prospect, I can assure you.
So one of the things that you did last year was this independent review for the government into the creative industries, which formed the basis of the sector deal that government announced a couple of months ago now. So
have you got a red book? Are you about to give me a red book?
No,
you're too young. You don't even remember this is your life. She's just telling me things. I'm like a drowning man, you know. She's telling me things from my life, and they're floating in front of me.
I have read your Wikipedia entry, but that's about it, really. So
well, it must be true.
It's very long. So the thing I wanted to ask you about, first of all, was, for those people who don't know, so I'm not quite as young as you think I am, because I wear a lot of makeup, I dye my hair, all that sort of stuff. But I do remember Ground Force.
Oh, yes.
And changing rooms. Nice. And so I do know a little bit about the sort of stuff you used to do. So can you perhaps just tell everybody a little bit about you and about your history in television?
Well, I'll be very brief, because then we'll talk about the creative industries and all the great things that could happen from it. But actually, I think, you know, it's this thing about being in the right place at the right time and not knowing what the F is going on, but opportunities arise. He's laughing, so I think it's happened to him as well. Opportunities arise and you just seize them blindly, and then you look back later and say it was all a plan, and it was all, and I realized at the time, and all this sort of stuff. But the thing was, in the late 80s, television was liberalized, and the broadcasters had been allowed not only to have the channels, but to make all the programs for the channels. So they were both the distributor and the producer. And Margaret Thatcher's government, for better or for worse, said we need independent producers. So there was a point in the late 80s, well, early 80s, Channel 4 could only take independent programs. Late 80s, the independent quota came in. This meant that there was an opportunity for companies to set up. And those of us who had entered, I'm 65, I'm sorry to say, and therefore I was at the time, whatever I was, 35 or something. So those of us who'd sort of been trained, in my case by the BBC, because I started off in BBC News and then worked in BBC Entertainment, documentaries, various different things, we'd had the training, and we were the right sort of age to take a risk and have a go. So we had the opportunity to set up a company. But the only other thing I'd say is you have to create value in a company. And as you know, and as you never cease to tell people you help, you've got to create IP, because IP has value. And we had the opportunity in the 1990s to sort of create lots of entertainment formats. And historically, the Americans had created all the formats, and they were all game shows. And we started to create, and in my case, yes, shows like Ready, Steady, Cook, Change Rooms, Ground Force. And it was great fun reinventing these genres and getting big audiences. But I didn't think I was inventing IP. And suddenly one day, somebody phoned up from America in 1994 and said, could they buy Ready, Steady, Cook? And I thought, fuck, I've got some IP. We did a format deal. And then I sort of began to think, oh, there's something in this, invent some more shows, sell them abroad. It's called, earning money from your inventions is called making money while you sleep. And of course, the whole of our sector depends on it in many ways. And so that's the only second point I'd make about the company, is that we created value by inventing IP and by getting IP revenue, as well as by being paid to produce shows. And so those are the two things. There was a moment in time when people of a certain age had an opportunity, and I could name you 10 other people. But here's the thing, nearly all of us who set up independent production companies that became successful at that time were trained by the state, if I can call the BBC the state. And that shows you and Anne Morrison's over there, who spent many years at the BBC and indeed was head of BBC training at one time, and that shows the symbiosis you need between, if you like, the state and private industry. And when I was chair of the Arts Council, we did actually a thing we call in fact, I can't remember what the name of it was, actually. I've had a beer, and and I'm getting dangerously relaxed. And the tie is, even a smell of this tie is intoxicating, actually. No, a spillover study. Thank you so much. Yes, that's exactly what it is. A spillover study. What we looked at was, we did a specific study of people who'd been trained as directors in theatre, publicly supported theatre, Royal Court or whatever, and how they go on to become directors in television, commercial television, and in movies. And the anecdotal example is Danny Boyle, who was trained at the Royal Court Theatre in Sloane Square and becomes, directs Slumdog Millionaire. And people go back and forth. And so there is this symbiosis, and it's extraordinarily valuable. So that's just my last point, really. I got a lot of opportunities because of public investment.
And do you think those same opportunities are available today for the next set of entrepreneurs?
No, I think more of them are available.
Okay, that's good.
I think, if Creative English had existed in the 1980s, people wouldn't have known what you were talking about half the time. And we hadn't.
They still don't, to be fair.
No, I think you explain yourselves well. I think Creative England is well understood, actually, and I think that the language of investment, the language of IP development, the language of being investment ready and being able to take on loans or equity and all these things, the business language of the creative industries, it's relatively embryonic compared to other sectors, but it's developing quite fast.
I suppose the point I made, though, I didn't make it, I was thinking it, is that in TV you've got a business model which has cash flow in it, hasn't it? And the punt that you took, there was some investment in that in the early ideas and developing those ideas. Our own experiences, lots of people come to us because they're looking for that first in, they're looking for that backing to produce that prototype or that show reel or, that sort of pilot or whatever. The sense that we have is that is getting harder. So although people are more fluent in and cognizant, I think, of the language around investment, the ability to back those ideas, it's not that I don't know whether it's harder or easier. I think it's still challenging, and I wonder whether or not when you were doing the review for government, you were brilliant, actually. You met a lot of people, you travelled around a lot, and you met a lot of different people. I'm just wondering what was the feedback that you had? What were the key takeaways from that consultation? Did that point come across to you then?
Yes. I know it's hard and I know it's a graft, but no, I came out of it optimistic, not pessimistic. So just to explain, it was a review commissioned by the government to essentially feed into their industrial strategy. In 2011, they had an industrial strategy which said it had 11 key sectors. Creative industries was not one of them, though offshore wind was. Go figure. And this time there are, I think, 6 or 8 key sectors, and creative industries is one of them, and that's a strategically very important. We were very upset, and we all of us, and we talked about it many times. We made life quite difficult for them, and we complained about it. We have to remember the creative industries is a sort of conceit. It's a construct. It's made up of all these different subsectors, and you know what they are. You know, television, radio, film. Marketing, advertising, design, and so on. This was invented in 1997 by sort of Chris Smith, David Putnam, and a few other people, rather brilliantly. No other country had defined a sector like that. Now, many countries in the world do use this same definition of a sector. In France, they do include food in it, unsurprisingly. We don't, which is probably a pity.
But it's a big movement for them to have creative and industry all in the same sentence, though, isn't it?
In France?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that an anti-Macron joke or what?
It's not a joke.
Sure.
It was more a reflection.
Well, I think it was a very good reflection, and when I've worked out what it means, I'll agree with you. So I was asked to essentially review the creative industries, very focused, to come up with a few ideas that could feed into an industrial strategy. I was not trying to do a blueprint for the next 30 years. That would be sort of megalomaniacal, entirely in character, in other words, but not very useful. One thing that came over to me so strongly, creative industries growing at 3.9% a year. At the moment, that's more than 3 times the rate of the economy, probably 2.5 times once we get February and March's snow out of our system. It's going to create 1 million jobs by 2030 at that rate of growth, or more if we can make it faster. In that same time, AI is going to destroy lots of jobs in other sectors, from traffic wardens to surgeons, from the highly skilled to the unskilled, and indeed the very unwelcome in the case of traffic wardens. But it's going to be revolutionary. But the thing about the creative industries is ideas, and at least in this century, not going to be created by software. They're going to be created by people. So it's extraordinarily, strategically, really, really important just in terms of creating jobs. But the thing I always try to remind everybody, and I always used to say that when I was at the Arts Council, first and foremost, it's not even about the economy. Because the cultural dividend of a sector that's about ideas, content, the national conversation, the national culture, with all due respect to the boot and shoe manufacturers, is just more important. It delivers more. And so that was the sort of, if you like, the strategic context. And I then proposed that my core proposal was that we invest money in creative clusters. It's demonstrable, and there's a lot of them mentioned in the report, that creative clusters work, and you know them and you visit them, that you get clusters of skill, networking, better investment, connectivity, and all the rest of it. And you've got, whether it's television in, say, Cardiff, the BBC's got a lot to do with that, whether it's games in Dundee. I could go on. There's the wonderful Creative Quarter in Nottingham, which is led by the Nottingham Contemporary, but very much backed by the local council. And/or the tech revolution in Bristol, which has actually a history of tech as well as creativity because of the aircraft industry. There are lots of interesting creative clusters around the country. Cities, and I have a 31-year-old daughter and a 27-year-old son. Neither of them drive. They're both in the creative industries, loosely speaking, not in my business. They live in city centres. 50% of the world's population live in cities now. It's going to be 70% in 30 or 40 years' time. These cities of the future are going to have their quality of life, their brand, their culture, but also their economy driven by these things. I think national government has a tremendous difficulty connecting with a sector made up of small businesses, and you deal with this all the time, Caroline. And so my point was, if you back creative clusters, and if they pitch for support, much in the way that they did for the City Deals, which was a previous thing which you may know about, the best, most meritorious bids will get support. And those will be local alliances. And I found this out when I was at the Arts Council, chairing the Arts Council. You had these fantastic, Manchester is the best example. There are many other good ones, but you had tremendous local council leadership from Richard Lees and Howard Bernstein. They connected apolitically with any government who was in and local business. You had a good connection with the LEP, fantastic connection to higher education, which is a core partner in this partnership of the way places develop. And then you have investment from some national organisations like the BBC or national funders like the Heritage Lottery Fund or the Arts Council, whatever. Once you you get this pool of expertise. And you know, Jim O'Neill, for any of those who know Jim, who's the former Goldman Sachs economist and champion of the Northern Powerhouse, Jim is going around with a smile on his face as though he's just had a pot of marmalade. And he's smiling because Manchester is growing faster than London at the moment. Now, there's some topical reasons for that, because London companies are downsizing post-Brexit. So there's some topical reasons, but genuinely the Northwest is taking off and growing because of those things happening. So creative clusters, I said, let's invest in them. Now, you know, we got, in response from the government on that core idea, I'd say we got to 10% of the way. And 10% of the way was being on the map when we weren't on the map before, and it's making some progress. So the Arts and Humanities Research Council, which comes under now UK Research Innovation. I'm going to blind you with acronyms, UKRI, which I'm sitting on the board of as a non-exec, because I'm there to wave the flag of the creative industries. They're putting, all told, about 50 million into 8 creative clusters. The Arts Council's putting some money in via their whatever it's called. I can't remember now. Something.
Cultural Development Fund.
Thank God you said that, yes.
I don't know what it is yet, though.
I'm 18 months out of the Arts Council, and my brain's wiped itself of lovely Arts Council stuff. And so we've made a start. I'm a great believer in competitions. The City of Culture, Hull, now Coventry. The great thing about the City of Culture competition was that you normally had a short list of 4 or 5 cities. In the case of Coventry, they beat Sunderland, Stoke, Paisley, and Leeds. That's it. No, not Leeds. Leeds was in for the European City of Culture, which is another can of worms. But the thing about the City of Culture is the places that have made good bids and get onto the shortlist, they do it anyway. So what you get with these competitions, or cluster-style competitions, is you get places, they get the strategy, they work it out, they work out the partnerships, and when they don't win the money, they do it anyway because they've worked out it's a good thing to do. So it's wholly good, and you get like 5 times the value from it. I think I've said enough.
No, it's really, honestly, it's so interesting listening to you because I write a lot of this sort of stuff, so it's lovely to hear it independently. I was going to ask you, you mentioned Manchester, and one of the great things about Manchester was the terrific partnership between Sir Howard Bernstein and Sir Richard Lees, which was a 25-year partnership, which we're now seeing the fruit of. But it just goes to show the length of time one has to work at a partnership in order to be able to reap the benefits. And there are lots of the people that we work with, when we work with a variety of different local players all over the country, from Stoke-on-Trent, which I think I've mentioned quite a lot today, but it holds a special place in my heart. Stoke-on-Trent, Macclesfield, Bristol, Leeds, Hull, wherever. Not all of them have Sir Richard Lees and Howard Bernstein, but all of the companies that we work with, I'm just wondering what your advice is for us in terms of of giving them some sort of direction around the things that they can do to raise the profile with their leaders, so that the big steps that we're managing to make, and I take on board what you say, which is perhaps we're 10% of the way there, but politically we've gone from a position where lots of ministers not lots of ministers, but the government talked very positively about the creative industries, to actually we've now got a bit of a plan and we've got some resource allocated to it. It's not enough for those people who hear from the government. It's not enough, but it's a good first step. But if you were to apply that to a local level, what do you think are the sorts of things that people can do to move it along a bit?
Well, so one of the proposals I made, which has not been followed up on yet, but I'm a tremendous fan of something called the Claw Leadership Programme. Does anybody know about that? In the arts? So it's been running for 14 years now, and Vivian Duffield started funding it 14 years ago, and they said, let's develop the arts leaders of the future. Now, Maria Balshaw, who's now the boss of the Tate, was on year one of that course, and she's a tremendously talented person, and she ran all the museums in Manchester, and I persuaded her to come on my arts council when I was there. That shows how you can develop real talent and leadership is the thing. Now, what I used to do with local councils, there are 390 local authorities in the country, I think, and we had relationship with about at least 200 of them at the Arts Council, and I spend my time on trains just going around seeing them, because they're all under pressure, spending pressure. Some of them are looking at a future in 5 years' time where they can only afford social care. They can't do anything else because of the elderly population that's growing and all that. It was to get them to keep the faith in investing in arts and culture and believing it and encouraging it, and for that read the more broad creative industries. Find the politician who believes in it, back them, give them the information they need to persuade their colleagues, give them the best practice from the other areas. We published a really interesting report when we got all the local authorities to say, what ideas are you coming up with for funding arts and culture while you're under the cosh? Giving empty buildings rent-free. Dealing with business rates, in certain areas, which is what the Mayor of London's and Justine Simons thinking of doing in East London. Hypothecating certain sums of money, perhaps doing some capital spending, which is easier than current spending, and putting in small endowments. All sorts of interesting ideas. Get those ideas, flowing between the different places, so they get the best ideas. There's one other thing, which is probably completely irrelevant to this, but I just want to mention it anyway, because I really enjoyed that last session. Did you all here for the last session? We just talking about
with short flicks.
Short flicks. I thought it was really good.
10:30 tonight on Sky Arts.
Really good, and we know that the creative industries are casualised, and we know they're too white and too middle class, and we know an awful lot of people get their jobs in casualised small industries via networks, and that's human nature. There's no point in being ashamed of it, but we don't get all the talent from all the places that have a voice in our national culture and everything else, and that's what that discussion was about, which I thought was quite inspiring. One of the proposals that is being taken up that was in my report was that we need to have a proper careers programme for the creative industries, that we need to develop materials that shows that creative industries are a proper career path, because I didn't endear myself to the minister at the launch of my report. 2 ministers, or even 3 ministers were on the stage, I think, and I said some parents think a career in the creative industries is worse than drug running or prostitution, and they looked slightly surprised. But what I was getting at, of course, was that if you are living in a deprived area and you're very ambitious for your kids and they've got real talent, then you want them to get qualifications, you want them to go into medicine and accountancy and so on, and of course they're excellent things to go into. But there are kids with a real spark, and they should see that the creative industries is an absolutely legitimate course to pursue. So we need a careers programme, and in my opinion, and it's going to be developed by the Creative Industries Federation, and they're going to get £2 million to do it, it's got to be aimed at parents on the one hand and kids on the other, and they're 2 different audiences. And it could be an enormous engine of social change. It could bring in, because it's one thing to beat companies around the head, like ITV, and quite rightly, to say, why aren't you more diverse? Why haven't you got more? But in the end, however hard you go out to try and find people to make it more diverse and get better candidates, you need a better supply too. And so you've got to deal with the supply as well as the demand. And so I'm only talking about it because I was sort of inspired to talk about it by that session, which I thought was excellent.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Baz. I know that you were very keen to be available for questions. So I'm just wondering...
Available for bar mitzvahs, actually. That's what I normally say.
We could have one of... Well, we couldn't have one of those now. So I'm just wondering, before we close, whether or not people have got questions for Baz, whether that's about the teapot incident on changing rooms, which I don't know. Am I the only one who remembers that?
The one I remember was at the front page of the News of the World. It said, BBC turned my house into a whore's palace. That's the one I remember.
I never actually bought the News of the World. I don't know. I just remember, I can't remember who it was, but they hung some shelves they were hanging shelves of somebody's priceless collection of teapots that they had collected over something like 40 years, and the shelves broke and they all smashed. Yeah.
See, we showed it because we're honest.
Okay. Any questions for Baz? Yes.
Here's a mic, Steve. No, you got one. There you go. Don't worry about it. Go for it.
I'm Stephen. I'm from the Creative Quarter in Nottingham, actually, and it's Nottingham Trent University and the City Council who should get the credit for it. You talked about the value of IP and how you'd been public sector trained. How do you think the public sector ought to be trying to capture some part of the value of that IP that effectively got outsourced to the private sector people who, quite a few people got rich on the back of that and continue to do so, and actually you now talk about those organisations being very cash-strapped, not having the money to support the creative industries. Is there a way that the public sector that is still educating young people and putting them out there can hang on to a bit of that cash and recycle it?
I think there probably isn't, but I understand the question. No, I understand the question. It's a very fair question. We used to think about that at the Arts Council quite a lot, you know, because we funded the National Theatre, and when the National Theatre had an enormous hit with, say, Warhorse or One Man, Two Governors or History Boys or whatever, and some of the directors of those, you know, made a lot of money. But, you know, you just take the rough with the smooth. You want the thing to grow. You want things to be great. And the dividend's not merely economic. It's cultural, as I said earlier. So I think you go with it, actually. I don't think you can hang on to it. I don't think you can. I'm sympathetic to the question, but and having thought about it at the Arts Council, I thought, I don't think we can do this. Sorry about that.
There's another question here.
Hi there, thank you. I'm from the Birmingham LEP. How do we get some further funding for what we'd like to do? So are you going to be further involved? Because as you say, we have maybe 10%, arguably perhaps not, because the Arts Council is controlling a small part and HAI is the rest. So there isn't anything which is really industry business focused at all in that. So I just wonder, are you going to be further involved to leverage some more beyond the 10% we have?
Well, I regard myself as involved in this respect, that I'm on the board of UKRI, we mentioned it earlier, and that is the umbrella body over the 7 research councils, Innovate UK, and the research body that used to be inside HEFKI. Research England, sorry, that says 9 bodies. And that altogether accounts for 6.5 billion this year, rising to 8 billion in 2 years' time. And actually, it's a very serious amount of money. Now, a lot of it's for science, technical engineering, but as we know, the really interesting work's going to happen because if you take just a game, you've had an interesting afternoon. I walked in the session, the first thing I heard was a bloke on the stage saying, now I'm going to ask you to commit suicide. Is that...
That was right, yeah.
Yeah, that happened. That was the session, was it?
That was, yeah.
Yeah, well, good. Counselling later. That was about games, of course, and games are this fantastic combination of engineering and programming ability and creative ability, and you need the two. And so all sorts of interesting things are going to happen. I don't, you know, yes, the LEPs have far less money than the old RDAs used to have. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Sorry, you're going to come back.
They have no revenue. So 31 LEPs met DCMS about this. So we talked through the sector deal. And really the issue is 20 million for the whole country, which could be revenue, which would be like sort of gold dust to really move things forward. That's a very limited pot.
If you're talking about
no
the quantum, I
AHC
agree
money
with you.
for the Midlands. So it's just there's a challenge in this 10%.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
You've done great work, but
Who's not asking for more money? And
we were just asking for some money.
yeah, no.
In the Midlands.
Come on,
Just a
who's not
tiny
asking for
bit.
more money? Actually, it's not to the overall value when you add all the bits together of the sector deal they've done is about 150 million, and some of that's money that's been repeated, of course, but it's still genuinely purposed to what we're talking about. But you saw the papers this morning. There was a report that said we had to put everybody's tax up by 10p to fund the National Health Service. Go figure, old boy. Go figure.
Thank you. On that point, and I can see the sign here that says wrap up, please, but I just wanted to ask one more question and then we will wrap up, which is, do you think we as an industry, as in the private sector players in the industry, are doing as much as they could do to David's point, really, in terms of investing? So one of the things that strikes me is I quite often say to people, if you're in the aerospace industry, it's full of lots and lots of small businesses because it's got quite a complex supply chain. But at the end of the day, there's a plane or something some bit that belongs to a plane or is part of a plane, bless you, the system for planes. Okay, so there's something to grab, and therefore there's something for everybody to gravitate towards. And it seems to me that they seem to have got their act together much better at speaking with that one voice and working out also how they then, as individual players, invest in themselves. What do you think? I mean, do you think we could do better? And if so, in terms of those, because we do have some big private sector players. Not as many as in planes, obviously, but your thoughts really around what it is that we could do better to invest in ourselves.
Look, until the Creative Industries Council, which is a quasi-governmental organisation, which I think you sit on, started doing its scoping and valuation of the sector about 5 years ago. We didn't know what the sector was worth. We were hopeless, therefore, at articulating our case to government. That's why we weren't part of the government's industrial strategy of the time. Though Creative Industry Council has done some really interesting scoping work. The Creative Industries Federation is trying to be a voice that can lobby. The Creative Industries Council is not a lobby or body, but the Federation is. We're beginning to do stuff that, I don't know, Big Pharma or Automotive has done for, 50, 60, 70 years. So we're very new to it. But we have to find our voice. Your equivalent of the aeroplane is the massive hit. We're a hits business. And we still have hits, more than 50% of the entertainment TV formats, 20% of the world's music, we're good at hits in this country. We can do hits.
We are.
That's your cue to sing Blue Suede Shoes, Caroline.
So I can't sing, and people who know me know that, so I'm not going to sing, but I am going to ask you all to put your hands together and thank you very much to Baz.